What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be going over 32 NHL power plays, breaking them down, and also I'm going to be giving you guys my projected power play ones for this upcoming season. Now, some of you may have just watched those 10 seconds and thought, why am I going to sit down and watch this video when I could just go to Daily Faceoff and look at their projected power plays? Now listen, I don't have anything against Daily Faceoff. I love their website, great company, but we do have to recognize that not all of their projections are perfect. Now trust me, my projections are far from perfect as well. I said Mike Matheson was going to be power play one and not Lane Hudson last season, and we all saw how that turned out. I also said Timo Meier was going to be power play one. Sheldon Keefe, why do you keep ruining my life? But the thing is, context is extremely important when talking about these power plays. You can't just look at a projection and assume that this guy's going to be on power play one over another guy. You need to do deeper research. To give you guys a few examples, if you go to the projected power play one for Colorado and Daily Faceoff, you'll see that it's Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar, Martin Necas, Gabriel Landeskog, and Arturi Lehkonen. I think Lehkonen has a great shot at power play one, but I also think Nichushkin has an equal or better shot at power play one as well, and that's not going to be reflected just by looking at those projections. This is of no fault to Daily Faceoff. They just have to put a projected power play one and power play two. But what I'm going to do for you guys is look at power play time per game, coaching changes that might affect the power play units. We're going to look at all the changes on the power play that we saw throughout the season. We're going to look at power play goals, power play assists, the positions of each players, so on and so forth. Another example is the Philadelphia Flyers power play. If you go to Daily Faceoff, you'll see that it's Trevor Zegras, Jamie Drysdale, Matvei Michkov, Travis Konechny, and Bobby Brink as their projected power play one. The problem with this projected power play is that who's going to take the faceoffs? Zegras is not going to faceoffs, Michkov, Konechny, and Brink don't take faceoffs, and Jamie Drysdale doesn't take faceoffs either. I'll talk about this in the Flyers section, but I'm projecting Couturier to be on this power play because they need somebody to win draws. It's extremely important on the power play, and unfortunately, this projection does not reflect what is probably going to happen. Again, not trying to rip on Daily Faceoff. I'm just saying there's a lot of context that needs to be understood. You need to look at all those things that I mentioned. You need to look at faceoff win percentage on the man advantage and even strength. And you need to take all of that information to project power plays. With all that being said, I'm going to save you the hassle of doing that research. I've done it all myself, and we are going to break down every single power play for this upcoming year, starting with the Anaheim Ducks. Now, I just want to make things very clear that the reason I'm talking about the Ducks first is because I am doing this by alphabetical order. If I was doing it by power play percentage last year, I would be talking about them last. That is right, guys. The Ducks had an 11.76 power play percentage last year. Absolutely terrible stuff. But we do have some new additions to the team, a new head coach, and some young players who could definitely progress going into this upcoming year. If we're looking at total power play points, Mason McTavish led the Ducks with 12. That is right, guys. He led with 12. We also had Troy Terry, who had 11. Then we had Jackson Lacombe, who had 9. Who actually averaged less ice time on the power play than Olin Zellweger if we're looking at the entire season, but he quickly became the number one guy as the season went on. Now, in terms of what the units look like last year, I would take it with a grain of salt because Greg Cronin is out, Joel Quenneville is in, and they could look completely different. Not only is Quenneville going to change these units, but we have new players on the Ducks, and they could definitely get a lot of power play time. One is that we have Trevor Zegras gone. He's now on the Flyers. We have Chris Kreider, who got traded to the Ducks. He has been a power play one specialist for a long time now. And then we also have Mikael Granlund, who had a really good season last year. Now, I do want to say, I think there would be two players that are locks if they ran a hypothetical dedicated first unit. And those two players would be Chris Kreider and Mason McTavish. The reason I say Chris Kreider is because he would be the best net front player on that team. He's one of the best net front players in the NHL. He had 26 power play goals a couple of seasons ago. So yeah, he would be on power play one. Now, the reason I say Mason McTavish is simply because of faceoffs. He took the most power play faceoffs last year in the Ducks. He had the best power play faceoff percentage, and they need somebody to win draws on that team. Ultimately, I'm not ruling out a hypothetical dedicated first unit. I definitely think it's a possibility. I do worry for a player like Cutter Gauthier or Troy Terry or somebody else if they ran a dedicated first unit, because there's a lot of forwards that could be on this first unit and some of them are going to be left out. I expect them to run a distributed power play one and power play two, and I'd imagine that the power plays would look something like this. You'd probably have Chris Kreider on one unit, Ryan Strome on the other, both of them being the net front players. You'd probably have Mason McTavish on the Chris Kreider unit because McTavish is the face-off guy for that unit, and then Strome would be the face-off guy for the other unit. For the rest, it could be a mishmash of players. You might see Leo Carlsson and Cutter Gauthier on the same power play unit because they're very likely going to be playing on the same line, even strength. I think they have a lot of chemistry. They developed that chemistry last season. Maybe Troy Terry's with those guys too, because there's a chance he's playing on the first line with them. You might have for Toronto and Granlund with McTavish. It's really hard to say, so I'm just going to leave it at this, but I wouldn't expect a dedicated first unit, at least to start the year. Next up, we have the Boston Bruins, who also had a pretty terrible power play last year, 4th worst in the NHL with a 15.22 power play percentage. Obviously, last year was not the greatest. Brad Marchand getting traded to Florida and then winning the cup, that's gotta hurt. You also had Charlie McAvoy dealing with an injury, and you have Hampus Lindholm missing almost the entire season. Now, if we're looking at power play time per game, number 1 was David Pastrnak, followed by Charlie McAvoy, Brad Marchand, who is obviously now on Florida. You also have Elias Lindholm, Pavel Zacha, Hampus Lindholm, Casey Middlestat, who was acquired before the trade deadline. You also have Mason Lowry, who got some good power play one time last year. And then you have Charlie Coyle and Morgan Geekie. Now, even though Geekie was 10th in power play time per game, if we're looking at the averages for the season, that doesn't paint the full picture, because this guy went absolutely off near the end of last season and found himself on line 1 and power play 1. With that being said, though, if we fast forward to post trade deadline and we look at power play time per game there, we will see that it was David Pastrnak, Mason Lowry, Morgan Geekie, Casey Middlestat, and Elias Lindholm. McAvoy was injured at this point, but this might give us a good picture of what to expect for this upcoming year. Now, I do say that, but we do have to recognize that the Bruins did go out and hire a new head coach in Marco Sturm, and he could have a completely new idea of what the power play should look like. Nonetheless, based on the talent or lack thereof, it's pretty easy to project this power play 1. I think you're either going to have Casey Middlestat or Pavel Zacha in front of the net. I think Zacha is probably a better option, but that's just my opinion. Then you're going to have Pastrnak on the left side, Elias Lindholm in the bumper, and then Morgan Geekie on the right side. In my opinion, it's probably still going to be Charlie McAvoy in power play 1, but that's definitely not a safe position. I could see Mason Lowry taking over in the middle of the season. However, McAvoy has way more experience on the power play, and he's also much better with the puck, and Mason Lowry needs to work on that. So in my mind, it will be Charlie McAvoy to start the year. There is also a dark horse candidate in Victor Arvidsson. He's been typically a power play 2 guy his entire season, with the exception of that 1 year on the Kings where he had 10 power play goals and 25 power play points, but you never know, maybe he could see some power play one time. Ultimately, this power play is still not the greatest. Pastrnak is one of the best players in the NHL. That doesn't need to be said. So he is going to be that consistent, safe player to ensure that this power play isn't absolutely terrible. But in general, I still see it as a bottom 10 power play in the NHL, and that's not great. Another fun team to talk about in terms of power plays is the Buffalo Sabres. Everyone's favorite punching bag. The Sabres had another terrible year last year. They were actually really good when it comes to even strength goal scoring, but their power play sucked. Now, their power play wasn't as bad as the Ducks or the Bruins, but they were still 9th worst in the NHL with an 18.78 power play percentage. In terms of power play goals, Zucker led with 11, Tage had 7, Peterka had 6, Dahlin had 5, Tuck had 3, Quinn had 3, Benson had 3, the list goes on. Basically what the power play looked like, you had the staples of Dahlin running the point, you had JJ Peterka on one of the walls, you had Tage Thompson usually on the left circle, which is where he should be, but Lindy Ruff was putting him in the bumper on some occasions. Like, what are we doing here? I mean, you're just banging your head against the wall trying to figure out how to make this power play work, where it's sitting right in front of you, the answer. Yeah, that was terrible. And then the other staple was Jason Zucker. This guy was very good in the power play last year. I was very frustrated he was on there because I wanted to see Tuck get on there, but I can't deny how good he was when it comes to scoring goals on this man advantage. His shooting percentage on the power play was absolutely insane, so it's going to come back down to reality, but with this output, I would expect him to be on power play 1 once again. In terms of who this 4th forward was on the power play 1 last year, it was basically a mishmash of a bunch of players. Alex Tuck, Dylan Cousins, Jack Quinn, and also Josh Norris, who played a good 3 games for the Buffalo Sabres on power play 1 until he got injured. We can put the pretends to be shot gif on screen. Yeah, thank you. With all this being said, JJ Peterka is gone, so somebody has to be on that power play 1 over him, and we also have to figure out who is going to be the consistent 4th forward on this first unit. I would hope Tage Thompson is on the left side and not in the bumper, and then I'd imagine we'd probably see Jason Zucker in front of the net, and then we'd have Rasmus Dahlin running the point. I also think Josh Norris is going to be power play 1 as well. He was power play 1 to start on the Sabres. I know he only played 3 games, but he he was power play one pretty much immediately. And in general, Josh Norris has been very good in the power play throughout his career. So I would expect to see that. I also wanted to mention that Josh Norris would be the guy taking faceoffs on power play one. So that's the reason why it's very likely he's on this top unit. With that being said, I think those are sort of the 4 staples to start the year. I could definitely see Jason Zucker being taken off power play one middle of the season, just because I think they might realize that he's not going to have a 50% shooting percentage on the man advantage and somebody else would be better there. But I'd imagine those 4 would be staples. And then the question is, who's going to be the 5th guy? In my mind, Alex Tuch makes the most sense just by looking at his offensive output over the last couple of years. Maybe that's just my fantasy hockey brain thinking. Alex Tuch had 36 goals last year and only 3 came from the man advantage. What type of points could he put up if he was power play one for the entire season? But nonetheless, I think it makes the most sense. He could be net front or in the bumper. Unfortunately, we do have to recognize that Lindy Ruff didn't like Tuch on power play one last year. I don't know why, but there surely was a reason, so that is something we have to consider. That would be the number 1 option, but I think the second option would be Jack Quinn. This is a player who obviously had a disappointing season last year, but I do think he still has a lot of potential. He is a pure goal scorer. He is a sniper. And then the other options would be either Yuri Kulik, Zach Benson, or Josh Doan. I also want to mention a third option, which would be my favorite. This would be the power play that I would run if I was Lindy Ruff. And that power play would be Tuch net front, Quinn bumper, Tage left circle, Josh Norris right circle, and Rasmus Dahlin running the point. This would be my ideal fantasy scenario where we see Jack Quinn break out, we see Alex Tuch on power play one, and we see Jason Zucker go back to power play two. This could definitely happen mid-season. I wouldn't expect it to be starting as the power play one just because I think Zucker deserves to be on there because of his last season's performance, but it's something to keep in mind. I'm sure all of these guys are going to get looks throughout the year just to see what works, but in my mind, it's number 1 Tuch, number 2 Quinn, and then number 3 Kulik, number 4 Benson, number 5 Josh Doan. The next team we're going to be talking about is the Calgary Flames. Now, the Flames were sort of perfectly mid last year. Their power play was 19th best in the NHL. And if we're looking at the players on this power play for sorting by power play time per game, number 1 was Morgan Frost, who got traded to the Flames mid-season. Then you had Nazem Kadri, Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, Matt Coronado. Then you had Connor Zary, Igor Sharangovich, Rasmus Anderson. The list goes on. Now, once Frost was traded to Calgary, we saw a pretty consistent power play one. They had Frost in the bumper, Weegar running the point, Kadri on the right side, and then I'd have to check the film again, but I'm pretty sure Huberdeau was mostly on the left side and Coronado was net front. Now, looking at power play points here, Huberdeau led with 23, Kadri had 22, Weegar had 21, Matt Coronado had 17. Then you had Rasmus Anderson with 9, Zary with 9 in 54 games, Frost with 8 in 32 games, which is pretty solid. Igor Sharangovich with 8 in 73 games, and the list goes on. All things considered, these players are pretty successful on the power play. If we're looking at goals, Huberdeau had 10 power play goals. You have Kadri with 9, Sharangovich with 5, Coronado with 5, Coleman with 4, Weegar with 4. The list goes on. Now, in terms of the power play one for this upcoming season, I'd imagine they're going to keep things pretty similar. I think they're going to keep Frost, Huberdeau, Coronado, and Kadri. You also have some other players that might get a look. Guys like Connor Zary or Sharangovich could maybe take a player like Coronado or Frost off, but in general, I think these 4 forwards are going to stay on power play one as long as they're with the team to start the season. Now, the big question is who is going to run the point for this power play? Who is going to be the defenseman? It's either going to be Mackenzie Weegar or Zane Parekh. Now, I think this pretty much boils down to if Parekh is going to be with the team full time, because let's be honest, Parekh is superior offensively to Mackenzie Weegar. Parek's offensive instincts are top notch. He is extremely dynamic. He's extremely skilled. He's also a very good goal scorer for a defenseman. And if he's with the Flames for the entire season, I see no way that he doesn't end up on power play one. With that being said, though, Parekh is 19 years old, and typically defensemen that young do struggle early on in their NHL careers, especially on the defensive end. That is one thing that might be holding them back from getting a roster spot and being with the team full time. And they might want to have him play in the AHL to develop the side of his game and become more of an all-around player. Unless you're giving him top 4 minutes in the NHL, I feel like it would be better to let him develop in the AHL, because I think asking a 19-year-old to play top 4 minutes in the NHL is a lot of responsibility, and it might not be the best course of action. Overall, this is the power play one I expect. We'll see what happens with Parekh, but it's either going to be Weegar or Parekh. Draft accordingly. Next up, you have the Carolina Hurricanes. Hurricanes, who didn't have a good power play last year, guys. They had a worse power play than Buffalo, Seattle, Columbus, Pittsburgh. The list goes on. At the start of the season, their power play was solid thanks to Martin Necas. Necas put up 22 power play points in 49 games with the Canes, but we know what happened. He got traded to the Avalanche. The good old Rantanen trade didn't work out in Carolina. He didn't want to sign there long-term, clearly, and they had to ship him out to Dallas. Before Necas was traded, it was a consistent, dedicated power play one with Necas, Gostisbehere, Aho, Svechnikov, and Seth Jarvis. However, if we move to post-trade deadline, the power play one was a pretty consistent Gostisbehere, Aho, Jarvis, and then Jackson Blake and Taylor Hall. With that being said, the obvious omission is Andrei Svechnikov in terms of power play time per game here, but we do have to recognize that during this stretch, Svechnikov missed a number of games and was dealing with injury. So that could have been the reason why they decided not to put him on the first unit and instead stick with this unit. In terms of power play points, Gostisbehere led with 27 in 70 games. Then you had Aho with 23, Necas with 22 in 49 games, Seth Jarvis with 19, Svechnikov with 18, Blake with 7, Hall with 6 in 31 games, and the list goes on. Now, if we're looking at goals, Svechnikov led with 10, Jarvis also had 7, Aho had 5, Blake had 5, Hall had 4, Gostisbehere had 4, the list goes on. Now, the Canes went out and got Nikolai Ehlers, a player who elevated the Jets power play to being the #1 power play in the NHL last year, a player that was long overdue to get on that top unit, and in my opinion, he will be on the top unit on the Canes. I also expect Gostisbehere to be on there. He had 27 power play points, like I said, in 70 games, so it makes no sense to take him off. I know some people are thinking that Alexander Nikishin is going to supplant him on this top power play, but I absolutely don't expect that to happen. The other two locks are Sebastian Aho and Seth Jarvis. Ultimately, the big question is who is going to be on power play one this year as the fourth forward. Is it going to be Andrei Svechnikov or Jackson Blake? Now, to be honest with you guys, I cannot tell you what is going to happen here. Rod Brind'Amour sometimes makes some questionable decisions, one of them being the fact that Nate just wasn't on power play one at all for the 23-24 season. I mean, he was power play one sometimes, but not consistently, which made absolutely no sense. So sometimes logic leaves Rod Brind'Amour's brain, and with that being said, there's a chance that he really likes Blake on the power play and puts him on that top unit. Now, if I had to pick somebody, I would say Svechnikov would be on power play one, simply because he dealt with some injuries last year. I mean, he deals with injuries every year, but the injuries were there. The big thing that stands out to me as well is the fact that Svechnikov had 10 power play goals, and he led the Carolina Hurricanes in power play goals last year. So that is worth something. I don't love the fact that he was taken off power play one at the end of the season, but that can be explained by the injuries that he had. So I would have to pick Svech. In terms of the odds, I would say 60% for Svech, 40% for Blake. Obviously, if Svech is not power play one, that really hurts his value. And same with Blake, because Blake doesn't have too much value without power play one time. I still like drafting Svech because of the shots and hits, but you do have to consider this when drafting, and you definitely want to pay attention to the lines in training camp. The next team we're talking about is the Chicago Blackhawks, and this was surprising me when I looked at it. The Chicago Blackhawks had the 7th best power play in the NHL last year with a 24.37 power play percentage. They had a better power play than Colorado, Toronto, Edmonton, and the Dallas Stars. Bedard is the player that led in power play points with 29 power play points in 82 games. Then you had Teravainen with 24, Bertuzzi with 20, Seth Jones with 15 in 42 games, which is pretty darn good. And then you had Donato with 14, Vlasic with 12, Foligno with 4, Frank Nazar with 4, Taylor Hall with 3, Sam Reinzel with 3 in 9 games, and then the rest of the list. With goals, Bedard had 11, Bertuzzi had 10, Teravainen had 7, Jones had 5. I'll put the list up here. I'm not going to list it all off. Now, in terms of the staples on this power play, Bedard and Bertuzzi were there for pretty much the entire season. Seth Jones was the guy until he got traded. You also had Teravainen, who was on power play one, and then you also sort of had Donato, but he got taken off power play one later in the year for Frank Nazar. So those were the staples. Once Seth Jones was traded, they had Alex Vlasic on power play one, who was pretty good on there. They tried Lev Shunov on power play one, and at the end, they had called up Sam Reinzel, who played pretty well in the power play too. Now, we did have an interim coach during this time, Luke Richardson was fired midseason, and now we have a new coach, so you might want to take that with a grain of salt. Nonetheless, though, this is what I would project the power play to be. Sam Reinsel, I believe, is a great power play 1 quarterback. I think there are other defensemen who could get a look, Vlasic, Korchinski, Levshunov, but Reinsel got that look last year, and he played pretty well with that role. And then I believe Bedard is obviously a lock, Teravainen's a lock. I think Frank Nazar is a lock as well. I think he's going to be in the top 6. They want to give him an opportunity on power play 1. I think he fits good in the bumper. And then I think the net front player is probably going to be Tyler Bertuzzi. I could see maybe Donato over Nazar or Bertuzzi, but in my opinion, you don't want to put Donato on power play 1 over Nazar, and Bertuzzi was really good on power play 1 last year. Now, do I think Chicago is going to be a top 10 power play again? No, I don't. I don't think they have the talent just yet. I think it's still going to be a decent power play considering what they did last year, and ultimately, this is my projected power play 1. Next up, we're talking about the Colorado Avalanche. The Avalanche, like every season, had a pretty good power play last year, 8th best in the NHL with a 24.79 power play percentage. The power play was carried by Nathan MacKinnon and Cale Makar. MacKinnon leading with 38 power play points, Makar with 35 power play points. Now, in terms of what the power play looked like last year, there definitely was a lot of changes. Nichushkin didn't come back until November because he was suspended. Lehkonen also missed some time at the start of the year, but he got some power play 1 time in spots. We also saw Ross Colton get some power play 1 time as well in spots, which was nice. And then we had Nichushkin come back. He was put on power play 1. They also had Ross Colton still in this power play for a little bit until he got injured. And then we had the Mikko Rantanen trade. After this, Nate just came into the fold and he was on power play 1 with MacKinnon and Makar and also Drouin. And then Nichushkin came back at some point. So it was basically a mix of Nichushkin and Lehkonen on that top unit. They also acquired Brock Nelson, who got some power play 1 time at the end of last season, mainly because Drouin was injured. And then we entered the playoffs. Gabriel Landeskog is back. This was pretty insane to me. I didn't think that Landeskog was going to ever resume his NHL career, but he was back and immediately put in the top 6 and also on power play 1. With that being said, the power play was pretty consistent in the playoffs, being Landeskog, MacKinnon, Makar, Necas, and Arturi Lehkonen. Unfortunately, Valeri Nichushkin didn't get a lot of power play 1 time, which I thought was a mistake, and that might concern some people heading into the season. This would be my projected power play 1. You're going to have MacKinnon on the right side, Necas on the left side, Landeskog in the bumper, Makar running the point, and I think you're either going to have Nichushkin or Lehkonen net front. In my humble opinion, as a Nichushkin fanboy, it should be Valeri Nichushkin. This guy had 10 power play goals in 53 games in 22-23, 16 power play goals in 54 games in 23-24, and even last year he was pacing for around 10. Nichushkin is a beast net front. I think he's better than Lehkonen in that role. Lehkonen can have that role in power play too, and yeah, Lehkonen only had 1 power play goal last year in 69 games and only 5 power play points. He is not as dynamic as Nichushkin, and Colorado is going to realize that. You do have Brock Nelson there, but I don't think Brock Nelson is going to be on power play 1 unless Landeskog gets injured or Landeskog ends up really faltering. I don't think Nelson would be on that top unit. Overall, this power play is going to be top 10 in the NHL, maybe even top 5, and I'm going to be drafting a good amount of Nichushkin because I think he's going to be undervalued once again. Next, we have the Columbus Blue Jackets, who had a 19.46 power play percentage last year, which was 22nd best in the NHL. Although this wasn't the best, they had the 2nd worst power play the year prior, so it was definitely an improvement. The Blue Jackets were a team that almost made it to the playoffs. They had a very surprising season. Zach Werenski obviously had the season of his lifetime, and you had breakouts in players like Kirill Marchenko and Kent Johnson. Sean Monahan was over a point per game. That first line of Voronkov, Monahan, and Marchenko was deadly. Fantilli broke out, even though he didn't really get a lot of power play time. Voronkov was a surprise. So yeah, overall, it was a great season for the Blue Jackets. If we're looking at power play time per game, you could see that they ran a dedicated first unit, guys like Werenski and Kent Johnson getting a large share of the power play time. And it was a pretty consistent power play 1 of Werenski, Monahan, Marchenko, Kent Johnson, and Dmitry Voronkov. The only 2 changes that we saw throughout the season is that when Monahan went down, they put Fantilli on that top unit. And also when Boone Jenner came back from his injury, he took Voronkov off that top unit as well. Boone Jenner wasn't very good in the power play, so I question that decision. I mean, Voronkov had the most power play goals last year, so that is something we're going to talk about. But if we're looking at total power play points and goals, the number 1 player was Werenski when it comes to points. Then you had Marchenko, Kent Johnson, Sean Monahan, Dmitry Voronkov, Yegor Chinikov, etc. And then with goals, like I said, Voronkov led with 8. You had Sean Monahan with 7, Werenski with 5, Kent Johnson with 4, Jenner with 2, Kirill Marchenko with only 2, which is very interesting. And then we had a few other players as well down this list. Now, I expect this power play to look pretty similar to what it was last year, but we have 2 big questions. The first big question would be, is Adam Fantilli going to crack power play 1? From a fantasy perspective, I would love for that to happen. I mean, last year he had 31 goals and a total of 54 points, with only 4 of those points coming from the man advantage. So you could argue that if he was power play 1, he could be a 70-point player. Unfortunately, Sean Monahan is kind of stealing his shine. Monahan is line 1 with Marchenko and also power play 1 as well. Some casuals might think, oh, well, just take Sean Monahan off power play 1 and put Fantilli on there. It's simple as that. The big problem is that Monahan is superior when it comes to faceoffs. Monahan had a 59.6 power play faceoff win percentage last year, which is exceptional. Fantilli's power play faceoff win percentage was 52.9%, which is great, but it was a smaller sample size, guys. I mean, if we're looking at even strength faceoff win percentage, it was 40.7. Now, you could argue, though, that if you have Jenner on power play 1 as a net front guy, he could take all the faceoffs because he is also exceptional at faceoffs, and he was the power play faceoff guy the season prior. That definitely is a valid argument. That is a possibility, but I don't know if that's going to happen for this upcoming year. Monahan is really good at faceoffs, like I said, but he's also really good in the bumper. He's a bumper specialist. So I think it makes sense for him to stay in that role. And also he plays even strength with Marchenko as well. So he has that chemistry with those guys. This is why I don't see them taking Monahan off for Fantilli, at least for this upcoming year. But Fantilli could maybe take Kent Johnson off. Maybe, I don't know, because Kent Johnson was great last year and he's a great playmaker. So that's hard to say. And in terms of the net front player, Fantilli's not really a net front guy. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. This is why I predict Fantilli to be on power play 2 to start the year. I don't love it, but we have to be realistic. The other big question is who's going to be the net front player. It's pretty much either going to be Boone Jenner or Dmitry Voronkov. In my opinion, it's going to be Voronkov. Boone Jenner did not look good in the power play last year when he was put on there. He doesn't really need to be the guy taking faceoffs because you have Sean Monahan. You could put Boone Jenner on power play 2 and have him be the faceoff guy there. And also you had that first line of Monahan, Marchenko, and Voronkov. So those guys have the chemistry together on the first line even strength, and that chemistry should translate to the man advantage. With all that being said, this is my projected power play 1. I'll put Voronkov / Jenner on here just because the coach wanted to put Jenner on power play 1 last year for some reason. So that is worth mentioning. So it could be a toss up between those two, but I expect Marchenko, Monahan, Kent Johnson, and Zach Werenski to be the staples, at least to start the season. The next team we're talking about is the Dallas Stars. They had the 17th best power play percentage in the NHL last year with a 22% power play percentage. I don't know if you guys remember, but at the start of the season, the Dallas Stars power play was absolutely trash. It was really bad, and they were pretty much running like equally distributed units. So power play 2 got the same amount of ice time as power play 1. And even though I was frustrated by it, I kind of get why they did it, because the power play 1 was just not producing. They essentially had Heiskanen running the point, Robertson on the left circle, Johnson in the bumper, Hintz on the right side, and then Jamie Benn net front. We eventually saw Duchesne got in there because I believe Hintz got injured, and then Hintz came back and they decided to keep Duchesne on there because his power play started to produce. This had meant that Jamie Benn was taken down a power play 2 finally, no offense Jamie Benn, and it was a consistent power play of J-Rob, Duchesne, Johnson, and Hintz. We also had Miro Heiskanen get injured and miss the rest of the regular season, so then Thomas Harley was put on power play 1. I would say Harley definitely transformed this power play. Once he got on there, the power play started to look much better. Then we had the Mikko Rantanen trade. When Mikko Rantanen got traded to the Stars, they started to absolutely suck. They couldn't produce even strength. They were getting outshot every single game, and the power play also started to stink again. They put Rantanen on power play 1, Duchesne on power play 2, and a lot of people started to realize that Duchesne was actually really good in this power play and was helping this power play be more dynamic. Fast forward to the playoffs, Jason Robertson was injured, and the power play 1 was Harley, Rantanen, Wyatt Johnson, Matt Duchesne, and Rupe Hintz. During the playoffs, you had Jason Robertson return and also Miro Heiskanen, but both of them were mostly on power play 2. They didn't get put back on power play 1. Now, this makes sense because they were injured, and you don't want to just immediately force them to the power play 1 when the power play 1 is already working. You don't want to fix what ain't broke. So I wouldn't put too much stock into that. With all that being said, it matters in context, but it doesn't matter too much because we have a new head coach. That is right, guys. Pete DeBoer is out as head coach. Glenn Gulutzin is the new head coach, and I'm going to be honest, I don't really know too much about him. Ultimately, I think this is good for fantasy, though. I think those Stars guys are going to get more ice time. I think the power play one is going to be more of a dedicated unit than previously, not only because of the coaching change, but because of the fact that Mason Marchment's gone, Mikel Granlund is gone, and their roster is not as deep as it used to be. Even though Duchesne was good when he was put on power play one last year, I still expect him to be on power play two. I think the first unit is going to be Mikko Rantanen, Jason Robertson, Roope Hintz, and Wyatt Johnston. Maybe if this power play struggles, you could see Duchesne on there, but I don't expect it. And then the big question is, who is going to be running the point? Thomas Harley or Miro Heiskanen? Now, I wish I could tell you with certainty what's going to happen here, but I just can't. Thomas Harley, he did look better on the power play than Miro Heiskanen last season. Harley is a much better goal scorer, and he provides a scoring threat that is not necessarily there with Miro Heiskanen. But Harley is far from perfect. Watching the Stars games last year, sometimes he would make pretty silly plays. Sometimes he does too much with the puck when he should be more conservative. He needs to be better at holding his corner on the blue line, because there was multiple times in the playoffs where I saw him get burned that led to shorthanded goals. There is that. I think Heiskanen is a little safer and he's more reliable in that regard. Heiskanen is also really good at zone entries. He makes these really good passes that don't necessarily end up on the score sheet. So honestly, it might be a 50-50 situation. If Harley can work on not coughing up the puck so much and giving up rushes, then I think it should be his power play to lose, because like I said earlier, the power play looks so much better with him running it. When Harley was put on power play one in January, they were like a top 5 power play in the NHL. He had more points per 60 than Heiskanen. He had more power play points per 60 than Heiskanen. Shots on goal per 60 was better as well. And he was just the better player last season. If I were to say the odds, I would say it's 60% likely it's going to be Harley, 40% Heiskanen. Hopefully Harley's on there for fantasy purposes, and hopefully we see the Dallas Stars power play get back to form. Next up, we have to talk about the Detroit Red Wings, who had a fantastic power play last season, 4th in the NHL at a 27% clip. The only teams ahead of them were Winnipeg, Vegas, and New Jersey. And in terms of what the power play one looked like last year, it was pretty consistent. You had DeBrincat net front, Raymond left side, Larkin bumper, Kane on the right circle, and then you had Moritz Seider running the point. There was a big question headed into last year who was going to be running the point, either Eric Gustafsson or Moritz Seider. I thought it was going to be Gustafsson, but I was wrong, and that led Moritz Seider to having a very good season. The Red Wings ran a pretty dedicated first unit in terms of the distribution of ice time on the power play, and if we're looking at power play points, the number one guy was Lucas Raymond with 37. I think we could see some regression there. That is a lot, but we also had Kane with 29, DeBrincat with 29, Larkin with 27, and Moritz Seider with 24. These guys were wildly successful in the power play. Larkin with 13 goals, DeBrincat with 13 goals, Kane with 12, Raymond with 8, and with this success, there's no way they're going to change the power play to start the year. Yes, there's probably going to be some regression, but I expect this power play to still be a top 10 power play in the NHL, and I'm excited to see this power play operate once again. Next up, we have the Edmonton Oilers, normally having a top 5 power play in the NHL. They didn't this year. It was 12th. Still solid, but not up to what we expect for the Oilers. They had a 23.72% power play percentage. In 23-24, it was 4th in the NHL, 26%, and then the year prior, it was 1st in the NHL at 32%. I'm not really sure what caused these power play issues. Maybe it was some bad luck. I expect them to still be a top 5 power play in the NHL for this upcoming year. But in terms of what the power play looked like, for the majority of the season, it was McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent-Hopkins, Zach Hyman, and Evan Bouchard. Now, the reason I say majority of the season is because right at the end, like the last month or so, they started putting Corey Perry on power play one ahead of Zach Hyman. Hyman obviously didn't have a good season, and we saw this continue throughout the playoffs. It was Perry on power play one, and he was really good in this role. If you're looking at power play points, Draisaitl led with 33, McDavid with 31, Bouchard with 26, Nugent-Hopkins with 20. Then you had Zach Hyman with only 12, and Corey Perry with 7. Now, the good thing for Zach Hyman is that Corey Perry is now on the Los Angeles Kings. So I would expect Hyman to get back on there, and I do think he's going to bounce back. There's not much else to be said here. I don't think Savoie or Howard or Mangiapane are guys that are going to be taking Hyman or Nugent-Hopkins off this power play one. I don't expect it. So expect this to be the power play one going into next year. Next up, we have the Florida Panthers, who had the 14th best power play percentage in the NHL last year with a 23.53% power play percentage. Now, the Florida power play went through a lot of changes last year. If we rewind to the start of the season, there was sort of a competition between Adam Boqvist, Juvis Balinskis, and also Aaron Ekblad to run the top unit. They tried Adam Boqvist on there, but he just couldn't crack the lineup. He was constantly getting scratched. Juvis Balinskis, I guess he was okay on there, but he wasn't a permanent fit. And ultimately, they ended up going back to Aaron Ekblad. For the first couple of months, that's what happened with the defensemen. But in terms of the forwards on power play one at the start, it was pretty consistent. Barkov, Tkachuk, Reinhart, and Verhaeghe. We then saw Matthew Tkachuk get injured, and he missed the rest of the regular season. So they replaced Tkachuk with Sam Bennett. During this time as well, though, Verhaeghe was struggling, and they took Verhaeghe off power play 1 and started to put Mackie Samoskevich on there. Then they traded for Seth Jones, so the rest of the regular season looked like Jones, Samoskevich, Bennett, Reinhart, and Barkov on that top unit. Then when the playoffs started, Mackie Samoskevich was getting scratched, so they went back to Verhaeghe on that top unit with Jones, Tkachuk, Reinhart, and Barkov. But then, as the playoffs went on, Verhaeghe got put back on power play 2, and they moved Ekblad to power play 1. So they were running 2 defensemen on there. That certainly doesn't give me a lot of confidence with Verhaeghe because, yeah, they clearly don't like him on power play 1. With that being said, let's talk about what's going to go on for this year and what I project the power play 1 to look like. Now, I'll say right off the bat, I don't think they're going to be running 2 defensemen on the power play. It's not something you see very normally. They did it last year in Washington with Chychrun and Karlsson, but I don't think Ekblad at this stage of his career is a guy that you need to put on power play 1. So in my opinion, it's going to be Seth Jones running the point. The other locks that you have are obviously Sam Reinhart in the bumper. You're going to have Barkov on the right side. And Matthew Tkachuk should be a lock for the net front, but we do have to talk about his injury. Tkachuk is undecided on whether he wants to have offseason surgery. Supposedly, if he were to decide to undergo offseason surgery, he would miss the first 2 to 3 months of the regular season. This is very problematic because the Olympics are very important to Matthew Tkachuk, as we all know, and he is going to want to play in the Olympics, and he's going to want to be healthy during the Olympics. With all that being said, this opens up a can of worms because now you're going to have to replace Tkachuk on the first unit. Now, I say it opens up a can of worms, but it really doesn't because we know who's going to be replacing him on power play 1, and that would be Sam Bennett. Bennett is great net front, and he fits into that role very nicely. Overall, I think those would be the locks in the power play, and the big question is who's going to be on the left circle because, like I told you guys earlier, last season they went with a lot of different options. As much as I would like Verhaeghe to be on there, and I think he has a shot to be on there, it has been clear to me that Paul Maurice doesn't like him on power play 1. Is it Verhaeghe's fault? Maybe. I haven't watched every Florida Panthers game. I think he has a really good shot. He's a very speedy player, but Maurice has consistently put him on power play 1 and taken him off. So I have doubts, and I'm not going to draft Verhaeghe thinking he's going to be on power play 1, but I think we have 3 options here. One is going to be Brad Marchand. This guy has been great on the power play for his entire career. He was great on the Panthers last season, and even though he's 37, he still has a lot of gas left in the tank, and I think he would be the number 1 option on this left circle. The second option would be Verhaeghe. I think Verhaeghe is still a very good player, but it's hard to trust it. And then the third option would be Mackie Samoskevich because he got a good amount of looks on power play 1 last season. We'll see what happens with the Tkachuk injury. And obviously, regardless of all of this, the Panthers should still have a top 10 or, top 15 power play in the NHL. Next up, we have the Los Angeles Kings, who definitely struggled on the power play last year, having the 6th worst power play in the NHL with a 17.87% power play percentage. In terms of what this power play looked like last year, there definitely was some changes throughout the season, but at the start of the year, it was a pretty consistent Fiala, Kempe, Kopitar, Brandt Clark, and Alex Laferriere. The reason Clark was on there is because Doughty was injured. He missed most of the season. And in terms of why Laferriere was on there, I'm not really too sure why. I mean, he had a good year, but he only had 4 power play points in 77 games. We also saw Quinton Byfield get some looks middle of the year, but he didn't produce on the power play at all, really. So maybe that's why they took him off again. And then as we got throughout the season, Drew Doughty came back and he was put back on power play 1. About 2 months before the trade deadline, it was a pretty consistent Fiala, Kopitar, Kempe, Doughty, and Laferriere power play 1, but then they traded for Andrei Kuzmenko. Kuzmenko was a fantastic net front player, especially on the power play, so he was immediately put on power play 1, and their power play started to play much better than it did in the months prior. Now, in the last couple of weeks, the Kings transitioned to a 5-forward power play, effectively taking Doughty off and putting Byfield on. Now, there is a chance they were just doing this to reduce Doughty's minutes because he was playing a lot of minutes, and he had just come back from a brutal leg injury, and I don't think he was 100% healthy. So maybe you could argue that this was a one-off, but they continued this in the playoffs. And what's interesting is that this power play did really well in the playoffs against the Oilers. They kept the 5-forward power play, Fiala, Kuzmenko, Kempe, Kopitar, and Byfield, and even though they lost a series, the power play looked much better. I will say, though, Byfield had 0 power play points here, and it is a concern of mine that maybe he's just not good on the power play, but I still think he has the chance to have a big breakout for this upcoming year. Now, in terms of power play play points, Fiala had 25, Kopitar had 22, Kempe had 18, Clark had 9, Byfield had 7, Doughty had 6, Kuzmenko had 5. The list goes on. I mean, in terms of goals, Kevin Fiala was pretty insane. 14 power play goals. And then there was a huge drop off. Kempe only had 7, Kopitar had 4, Byfield had 3, LeFerrier with 2. Yeah, not a lot. In my opinion, guys, we have 2 options. The 2 options are, one would be a 5-forward power play, the one that they ran at the end of the season with Kuzmenko, Byfield, Kopitar, Fiala, and Kempe running the points. Now, I would say the power play looked better with this grouping together, but we have to recognize that 5-forward power plays are not that common in the NHL. Now, the Leafs did it last year with Marner running the points, but the reason I don't think it's very common is because there's not a lot of forwards that could hold the blue line as well as defensemen can, and you're running a risky game having a forward running the point because they're going to be coughing up more shorthanded chances, giving up rushes. So that's definitely a concern of mine, but Jim Hiller put it together in the playoffs when it mattered the most last year. So, you know, it definitely is a realistic possibility. But I think the second possibility would be putting the defenseman back on power play 1. I think you would have Kuzmenko, Fiala, Kopitar, Kempe, and then you'd have, in my opinion, Brandt Clark on the top unit. Now, Drew Doughty was put on power play 1 over Clark last year when he returned. He is the vet. He has a lot of power play experience. So that is one concern of mine, but I really think they should hand the keys to Clark if they're going to go back to a defenseman on the power play. And yeah, I'd cross my fingers that that would be the case. I still think it's more likely that Clark would be put on this unit though, because in my opinion, he is more offensively gifted than Doughty. They should try to reduce Doughty's minutes at this point in his career. And I mean, Clark had 33 points in 78 games last year with only averaging 16 minutes and 17 seconds of ice time per game. Now, some of you may be thinking, where is Quinton Byfield? What are you doing? Byfield needs to be on power play 1. Trust me, guys, I would love to see Byfield on power play 1 in this scenario, but the reason why he wouldn't be power play 1 is because they need somebody to take the draws on the power play. And Kopitar is very good at faceoffs, and Byfield is not. If we just look at faceoff percentage last year, Kopitar's power play faceoff win percentage was 69.2%. His even strength was 56.2. Byfield's was 44.7 even strength and 42.9 on the man advantage. So yeah, Byfield is not a reliable center when it comes to taking faceoffs at this point in his career. We also have to recognize that Byfield hasn't been that good on the power play when given the opportunity. That's just a fact, and you have to accept it. Overall, I think Byfield's only shot of being on power play 1 is either them staying with the 5-forward power play, which is definitely a possibility, or if there was an injury. Maybe Byfield doesn't break out this year, maybe he breaks out next year, but I'll talk about Byfield in my breakout video. Next up, we have the Minnesota Wild, who had the 20th best power play in the NHL last year with a 20.87% power play percentage. Obviously not the best season for the Wild when it comes to the power play, but I'm assuming a large reason for this is because Kaprizov missed half of the season, only playing 41 games. In terms of power play points last year, Boldy had 21, Zuccarello had 16, Rossi had 16, so he was good in the power play. And we also had Kaprizov with 14 and 41 games, Eriksson Ek with 10 and 46 games, Faber with 10 and 78 games. The list goes on. In the start of the year, it was a consistent power play 1 of Zuccarello, Kaprizov, Boldy, Eriksson Ek, and Brock Faber. But then we also saw Spurgeon get a look on power play 1 as well. We also saw Rossi get power play 1 time early in the year because Joel Eriksson Ek was injured, so that was another change that happened. And obviously Kaprizov went down. Joel Eriksson Ek missed more time, so the power play 1 was Zuccarello, Boldy, Rossi, Faber, and then a mix-up of a couple other players. Then at the end, when Kaprizov came back, they ran a 5-forward power play unit with Rossi on it, with Kaprizov, Boldy, Eriksson Ek, and Zuccarello. In the playoffs, we saw Zeev Buium join the team. He played 4 games, put up 1 assist, and in those games, he was power play 1. It was a power play 1 of Zuccarello, Kaprizov, Boldy, Eriksson Ek, and Buium. Now, I think this power play is pretty easy to project. I do have to check the film again, though, because I'm not sure if Boldy was in the bumper or if he was on one of the circles, because I think I saw Zuccarello opposite of Kaprizov on the left circle, Kaprizov on the right circle. So this might not be completely accurate, but you have Eriksson Ek front of the net, Kaprizov, Zuccarello circles, and then Boldy in the bumper. Could Rossi be power play 1 over Zuccarello at some point? Maybe. I mean, we haven't seen that happen just yet. Rossi's only been power play 1 when there is injuries or when they decided to run a 5-forward power play near the end of last season. And we also have to talk about the fact that Rossi sort of fell out of favor with the head coach, didn't get a lot of minutes in the playoffs. You had this contract situation as well. So, I mean, he's been on the trade block for a while, so it's hard to imagine them putting him on power play 1 over Zuccarello. I'm not ruling it out, though. With that being said, unless there's any injuries that happen, I expect this forward group to stay the same on the top unit. And then, based on what we saw in the playoffs, I think it's going to be Zeev Buium running the point. Now, Buium is 19 years old, and there's not a guarantee that he's going to be with the Wild the entire season. They might want to have him develop in the AHL. I don't know, but I think there's a good chance he makes the team and he's quarterbacking power play 1 all year. William is extremely dynamic. I think he was a steal at number 12 in the 2024 NHL entry draft, and he's just a tremendous skater. So I'm excited to see what he can do for this upcoming year. I will say, though, if William doesn't make the team or they decide they need him to develop in the AHL to develop his defensive end of the game, then they would probably either run Faber or Spurgeon on power play 1, or they would run a 5-forward power play with Marco Rossi. We will see what happens, but I think this power play is going to be a top 15 power play in the NHL, and I'm excited to see what guys like Kaprizov and Boldy can do for this upcoming year. Next up, we have the Montreal Canadiens, who had the 21st best power play in the NHL last season, sporting a 20.09% power play percentage. In terms of power play points, Suzuki led with 27, Hudson had 26, Laine had 19, Caulfield had 17, Matheson had 10, Slafkovsky had 10. The list goes on. In terms of goals, though, Laine led with 15 power play goals in 52 games. Very impressive. Caulfield had 10 in 82 games. Gallagher had 5, Slafkovsky had 5, Suzuki had 4. So yeah, not the greatest in terms of goals. Laine really carried this power play, and let's talk about what this power play looked like. At the start, you had Laine injured, so the top unit was Suzuki, Caulfield, Slafkovsky, Kirby Dach, and then Mike Matheson. Lane Hudson had not taken over power play 1 at this point, but people realized very quickly that he should be the guy. After a month or so, Lane Hudson was put on power play 1, and then Laine eventually returned as well, bumping Kirby Dach to power play 2. For the rest of the season, it was a pretty consistent Caulfield, Suzuki, Laine, Slafkovsky, and then Lane Hudson. Now fast forward to the end of the regular season, highly touted prospect Ivan Demidov joined the Montreal Canadiens and immediately got into the top 6 and on power play 1. In terms of Demidov as a player, this guy is electrifying to watch. He's extremely skilled with the puck. He's creative. He's talented. He has everything you want in an offensive player. And we saw in the KHL, at the age of 19, he broke the record for most points by a player under the age of 20 in KHL history. This was better than Kaprizov, Michkov, Kuznetsov, all the offs that you can think of. With that being said, in the small amount of games that we saw him play with the Canadiens, he showed flashes of brilliance. Definitely some growing pains in terms of the defensive side of things, but it's clear that this kid is offensively talented. This is all leading me to the big question. Will Demidov be power play 1 for this upcoming year? If you think the answer is Demidov, I'm not telling you you're wrong. I'm just saying there's a huge roadblock, and his name is Patrik Laine. People assume that just because there was a small stretch in the playoffs, the 2 games that Laine played in, where Laine was power play 2 and Demidov was power play 1, that means that Demidov is guaranteed to be power play 1 this year. What people are failing to realize is that Laine's hand was completely messed up. He was injured, and there's a reason he only played 2 games in the playoffs. With that being said, I am not considering that when factoring in my projection for power play 1. I am going to consider which player plays each role in the power play and how they're going to fit. Because let's be honest, guys, Laine is a power play specialist, and he is a huge threat from that left side. You can call Laine a one-trick pony all you want, but the fact is, he had 15 goals in 52 games, which put him on pace for 23 power play goals for the entire season, and that would have led the entire NHL. Do I think his power play goal scoring was sustainable? No. But do you really think that a fully healthy Laine is just going to be put on power play 2 to rot because Demidov is a rookie that's coming to join the team? It's a possibility, sure, but we have a 19-year-old versus a player who is the best power play goal scorer in the NHL last year. This is why I go back and forth on Demidov versus Laine, because I can't see them having Laine on power play 2 unless they're giving equal distribution of ice time to that second unit. The only other player that Demidov could take off the power play is Slafkovsky, because Slafkovsky hasn't been that good on the man advantage. But this doesn't make a lot of sense either, because what, you're going to put Suzuki net front? It doesn't really work. Slafkovsky is a big body who's going to be their net front player on the power play, and without him, you don't have someone to do that. This is why if I'm projecting power play 1, I think we're going to see Laine left circle, Slafkovsky net front, Caulfield bumper, Suzuki right side, and then Hudson running the point. Ultimately, this is what I'm expecting if everyone is healthy. I don't have a crystal ball, so don't take my word as gospel, but I just think this makes the most sense based on the information that we have. With that being said, I still think Demidov has a great shot at power play 1. I think if he plays well throughout the year, they're going to give him a look. There's also the chance of injuries, especially with a guy like Laine, and if that were to happen, then Demidov's getting put on on there immediately. And hey, it could be a situation where the Montreal power play is struggling early and they decide to switch it up early on in the year. To sum everything up, the number one option I believe is Laine on the left circle, how they ran the power play last season. The second option would be Demidov on the right circle, with Caulfield being moved back to his natural position on the left side, moving Laine into power play 2. And then I think the third option would be Slafkovsky getting taken off and Suzuki put in front of the net. I know it doesn't make too much sense. Suzuki is not a big body that can screen the goalie and tip pucks in, but we can look to a power play like Utah where Logan Cooley's net front and he put up 20 power play points last year. So it's not out of the realm of possibilities that Demidov would take Slafkovsky off power play 1. I guess the fourth option would be a 1A, 1B situation, but I see that as the least likely option just because you have some all-star level power play specialists that deserve to be out there for as long as possible. If you think I'm an idiot, comment below and let me know and tell me why Demidov's going to be power play 1 over Laine to start the year. Next up, we have the Nashville Predators, who had the 18th best power play in the NHL last year, a 21.93% power play percentage. Not bad, but pretty much middle of the pack. In terms of who was on this power play 1, it was pretty darn consistent. It was Roman Josi, Steven Stamkos, Filip Forsberg, Jonathan Marchessault, and Ryan O'Reilly. Now, Roman Josi got injured at the end of the year. He got a concussion, and they had Nick Blankenburg on power play 1 and also Brady Shea at times. So that was pretty much the only change. Nyquist got some power play 1 time last year, very rarely, only in certain spots. So I expect this power play to be pretty similar, but let's take a look at the power play points here. We had Filip Forsberg with 26, Marchessault with 23, Stamkos with 21, Josi with 17, Ryan O'Reilly with 17, Brady Shea with 10. The rest of the guys doesn't really matter. And in terms of power play goals, Steven Stamkos, he's a power play specialist, guys. Not so good on even strength, but great in the power play from the left circle. Stamkos had 14, Filip Forsberg had 10, O'Reilly had 9, Marchessault had 4, and Roman Josi only had 2. There's not much to talk about here. I expect it to be the same in terms of Ryan O'Reilly from the net, Stamkos left circle, Marchessault bumper, Filip Forsberg right circle, Roman Josi point. We obviously have Josi dealing with a heart issue, but supposedly he has been progressing exceptionally well and is expected to be there at the start of the camp, so he's expected to start the season. I'm not too worried about it unless we get a different update. But yeah, I mean, I expect this power play to be pretty similar. My big issue is that you don't have a lot of playmakers on here. You have a lot of shooters, a lot of righties, and you have some guys that are getting older, like Steven Stamkos and Roman Josi. So it's okay, but yeah, I think it's going to be pretty middle of the pack, probably below average compared to the rest of the NHL. Next up, we're talking about the New Jersey Devils, who had the third best power play in the NHL last year with a 28.24% power play percentage. If we're looking at total power play points, Jesper Bratt had 34. He led the team. Then you had Nico Hischier with 29, Jack Hughes with 27 in 62 games, so he probably would have led the team if he played the full season. You had Luke Hughes with 16, Dougie Hamilton with 15 in 54 games, Stefan Noesen with 15, and Timo Meier with 13. In terms of goals, Hischier led with 14, Noesen led with 11, Meier led with 7, Jack Hughes with 6, Dawson Mercer with 6, Hamilton with 5, Jesper Bratt with 4. The list goes on. Now, in terms of what this power play looked like last year, to start the season, it was Dougie Hamilton as I expected, and it was also Timo Meier. Unfortunately, he was quickly taken off in favor of Stefan Noesen. In terms of why they took Meier off power play 1, I can't say for certain, but we do have some clues. Sheldon Keefe had an interview later on in the year where he said he didn't like Meier on power play 1. That was an exact quote. I think he said that Meier, they needed some offense on power play 2. And Meier provided that. So that was one reason. The fact that if Noesen was on power play 2, then they pretty much have a pretty lackluster second unit. In my opinion, another reason why Noesen was on the top unit is because he's a right-handed shooter. Jack Hughes, Jesper Bratt, Nico Hischier, and Timo Meier are all lefties, and sometimes that kind of messes things up in terms of setting players up for one-timers, and I think Noesen just fit better in that regard. That was a consistent power play 1 for most of the season, but then Dougie Hamilton got injured, as he always does, and then Luke Hughes was put on power play 1. Then Jack Hughes also got injured, as he always does. And then Timo Meier finally got back on power play 1. And listen, he was good on the power play when Jack Hughes was out. Now, one important thing to note here is that Dougie Hamilton came back right at the end of the year, just in time for the playoffs. And in the first game, when Dougie Hamilton and Luke Hughes were both healthy, it was Luke on power play 1. Unfortunately, Luke Hughes got injured. So Hamilton was power play 1 for the rest of the series. Luke Hughes played pretty good on the power play when Dougie Hamilton was out for like 2 months. And I personally think that this season, it is going to be Luke Hughes on this top unit. I just think it makes too much sense now. Luke and Jack being brothers, having that chemistry. I'm sure both of them want to be on power play one together. And Luke is going to be on the Devils for a number of years. He's their franchise defenseman at this point. And Hamilton, he has been in trade rumors for quite a while now. So I don't think they see Hamilton in their long-term plans. You want to get Luke on there, getting more reps on power play one. So that's what I expect to happen. I think it's going to be Luke on here. It's going to be Jack Hughes. It's going to be Nico Hischier. It's going to be Jesper Bratt. And it's probably going to be Stefan Noesen. I wouldn't completely rule out Timo Meier being on power play one, but it seems pretty unlikely at this stage. They clearly don't like him on power play one. He hasn't really been power play one since getting traded to the Devils. And unless there's an injury, I just don't expect it. Maybe they could throw Meier on the right circle. They could have Bratt in the bumper, Hischier net front. But why would you go ahead and change this power play when it was the third best power play in the NHL last year? Yeah, we'll see what happens, but this is my projected power play one. Ew, what is that smell, dude? Where is that coming from? Oh my God. Oh, it's the New York Islanders power play. The Islanders had the second worst power play in the NHL last year with a 12.56 power play percentage. And yeah, it wasn't great. If we're looking at total power play points last year, Noah Dobson led the team with 12. We had Cal Palmieri with 9, Lee with 9, Horvat with 7 in 81 games. Simon Holmstrom with 6, Pajot with 5, Brock Nelson with 4, Tony DeAngelo with 4 in 35 games, Barzal with 4 in 30 games, Duclair with 3 in 44 games. The list goes on. Losing Barzal was obviously a huge blow to this power play because he's their best offensive player. And I mean, in terms of what the units looked like last year, they changed quite a bit. Noah Dobson led in power play time per game, but he wasn't necessarily a lock on there as we saw from the season prior. Bo Horvat got a lot of power play time. He's the guy in the bumper. He's the guy taking faceoffs. Anders Lee got some good power play time, but pretty similar to Palmieri. Both those guys being net front players. We also saw Simon Holmstrom get some good power play one time as well. Duclair got some looks. A bunch of guys got looks, and it wasn't great. The biggest change would be Tony DeAngelo signing with the Isles, immediately getting put on power play one. I believe they ran 2 defensemen on this first unit for a little bit with Dobson and DeAngelo, but I know Adam Boquist got some looks on the first unit. I know they were just mixing it up a lot. So I would take all the changes last year with a grain of salt. With all that being said, Barzal is going to be back this year, and I think a large reason why they ran distributed units last year is because Barzal was injured, and now there's a good chance they run a dedicated power play one. In terms of what this power play is going to look like, we do have some new additions to the team that could get power play one time, and the first player here would be Jonathan Drouin. I think there's a good chance he's line one, even strength, and power play one, and I think to start the year, that's what it's going to be. But you also have Maxime Shabanoff, a player from the KHL that was signed to the Isles. He was over a point per game, 67 points in 65 games. Very dynamic, skilled player, but he is very undersized. That would be my only concern, mainly for even strength ice time. But on the power play, he definitely has a shot at it. I don't think he's going to get it right away. I think it's going to be Drouin, but I could definitely see a situation where Shabanoff is on that first unit if he plays like he did in the KHL. I think the locks are definitely Barzal, Horvat, and Tony DeAngelo, with Drouin being mostly a lock, I would say, but obviously you don't know with Shabanoff. And then the other question mark would be who's going to be net front, and that's either going to be Cal Palmieri or Anders Lee. It's really hard to say because those guys have been bouncing around a lot on the power play over the last couple of years, but one of those guys should be on there. Overall, I expect this power play to improve from last year. I mean, the bar is low, but the fact is Barzal is going to be back and he is a big player for this team. And on paper, it's not the worst power play in the world. It will probably be a bottom 10 power play if I were to take a guess. Next team we're talking about is the New York Rangers. A disastrous season last year overall. And on the man advantage, they had the 5th worst power play. They had a 17.62% power play percentage last year. And I'll just name some teams that had a better power play than them. The Kraken, the Sabres, the Sharks, the Blue Jackets, the Flames, the Predators, and the Chicago Blackhawks, and the Pittsburgh Penguins. The season prior, they had the 3rd best power play in the NHL, and then the season before that, they had the 7th best power play. So this was such a huge drop-off, and yeah, let's talk about it. In terms of what this power play looked like, it was pretty consistent until the trade deadline. It was Fox running the points, Benajad on the left circle, Panarin on the right circle, Trocheck in the bumper, and Kreider net front. That's the thing that's puzzling because this power play was pretty much the exact same as it was in the last 2 years, but it just didn't have the same level of success. Now, we saw JT Miller get traded to the Rangers at the trade deadline, and he was mostly power play one for the rest of the year. And then there was a couple of mix-ups. Sometimes it was Kreider on power play one, sometimes it was Trocheck. With that being said, if we're looking at power play points, Panarin led with 26, Benajad had 19, Fox had 18, Trocheck only had 12, JT Miller had 8 in 32 games, and Chris Kreider only had 7. In terms of what this power play is going to look like, I think the locks are going to be JT Miller, Mika Zibanejad, Artemi Panarin, and Adam Fox. I think you're probably going to have Zibanejad on the left circle, repping one-timers. You're going to have Miller in that front, and then you're going to have Panarin on the right circle. The big question for me is who is going to be this fourth forward, and I think it comes down to either Alexi Lafreniere or Vincent Trocheck. And listen, to all you Alexi Lafreniere truthers, I think this is the year where he gets on power play 1. Yes, you heard that right. I think it's going to be Lafreniere on power play 1. And the reason I say this is because in seasons past, they sort of needed Trocheck on the first unit, mainly for his faceoffs. The thing is, now with JT Miller in the fold, he can be the faceoff guy on the man advantage. Like, he's an exceptional faceoff guy as well. I think Lafreniere has a higher offensive ceiling than Vincent Trocheck, and they might as well try it because last year the power play was terrible without him on it. I don't have 100% confidence in this because I don't have a crystal ball, but this is what I'm projecting the power play to be, and I think I'm going to be drafting Alexi Lafreniere quite a bit in my upcoming drafts. Next up, we have the Ottawa Senators, who had the 11th best power play in the NHL last year, sporting a 23.79% power play percentage. Stützle led in power play points with 33, followed by Drake Batherson with 30, Sanderson with 30, Tkachuk with 23, Claude Giroux with 18, Joshua Norris with 11. The list goes on. It's also worth mentioning that Dylan Cousins had 8 power play points in 21 games, and that's pretty darn good. In terms of goals, Brady Tkachuk led with 14, then it was Drake Batherson with 13, Josh Norris with 6, Sanderson with 5, Stützle with 5, Giroux with 4, Perron with 4, etc., etc. The Sens run a pretty dedicated first unit if we're looking at ice time share between the units, and in terms of what the power play looked like for the majority of the season, it was Stützle, Sanderson, Tkachuk, Batherson, and Norris, but then Josh Norris got traded to the Sabres, and they picked up Dylan Cousins. You did have Claude Giroux get some power play one time last year, but in general, if we're looking at the rest of the season after Dylan Cousins joined the team, it was pretty consistent in being Stützle, Sanderson, Tkachuk, Batherson, and Dylan Cousins. Now, Giroux is their best face-off guy on the power play, so he does have that advantage over these other guys, but Brady Tkachuk and Dylan Cousins are good on the circle as well, so it's not too big of a concern. Those guys can take faceoffs. Overall, because of the success of this power play being 11th best last year and the fact that Dylan Cousins had 8 power play points in 21 games, I would expect them to keep this power play together to start the year. I think Cousins is going to be a sleeper this year, especially if your league counts hits guys, because he was hitting like crazy last year. But in general, this power play should still be really good, and it should probably be top 15. Next up, let's talk about the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, the Flyers had another year where their power play was trash, and it was 3rd worst in the NHL with a 14.95% power play percentage. Funny enough, though, the Flyers had the worst power play in the NHL for 3 consecutive seasons before this year, so you did see an improvement. In terms of power play points, Konechny and Michkov tied for 17, leading the team. You had Tyson Forster with 8, Owen Tippett with 7, Morgan Frost with 7. He's on the Flames now. Jamie Drysdale with 7, Sean Couturier with 4, Bobby Brink with 4. The list goes on. In terms of goals, Konechny had 8, Michkov had 8, Forster had 6. You also had the rest of these guys in the 2 and 1 mark. So yeah, you guys can see the list right here. In terms of what the power play looked like last year, there were a lot of mix-ups as usual. John Tortorella was mixing up the power play units constantly. He did this the entire time he was coaching Philly. It was a disaster, but I guess, hey, if the power play isn't working, then you probably want to switch it up to see what works. I will say though that this year Michkov and Konechny were staples on this man advantage, and they did get more power play time on ice share compared to players in previous seasons. The big thing that we have to mention is that John Tortorella is out and we have Rick Tocchet in, so that's definitely an interesting change. I'd hope that we would see a dedicated first unit, especially with guys like Michkov and Konechny there who have the ability to perform. And you want those guys out on the power play for as long as possible. With that being said, though, it's pretty hard to project what this unit is going to look like because we don't really have a frame of reference from last year, considering Tocchet is a new head coach. Nonetheless, I do have kind of an idea of what they might do, and I guess the first thing I'll mention here is that the Flyers acquired Trevor Zegras. So that's a player that's going to be added into the fold who has a very good shot of being on power play 1. Let's break it down. I think the defenseman on here is probably going to be Jamie Drysdale. Drysdale Drysdale, I know he struggled, but he is the most likely candidate for a defenseman to be on power play 1. I mean, you have Travis Sanheim, but, you know, he's just not your prototypical power play 1 defenseman. You also have Emil Andre and Igor Zamula, who got some power play time last year, but again, Drysdale seems like the most likely candidate. I will say that the Flyers went with the 5-forward unit last year at the end of the season, so that's not out of the question. Like, there's a chance they go with 5 forwards. Maybe they have Zegras running the point, but I think it's more than likely going to be Drysdale. Now, in terms of the forwards, the 2 obvious locks are Michkov and Konechny. You're going to have Michkov on the right circle, Konechny in the bumper, I believe. And the big question is, who are the other 2 forwards? I personally think it's going to be Trevor Zegras on this top unit. He's had success on the power play in the past, not in the last 2 years, but in his first couple of years on Anaheim when he was putting up 60+ points, he was pretty good in the man advantage. I think Zegras' game is going to go well with Konechny and Michkov on this top unit. He's a great playmaker, very good skater, very mobile, and yeah, I'd imagine he would be on the left circle. Now, in terms of the final forward, as much as I would like to see Owen Tippett on power play 1, or even Tyson Forrester, because Forrester was a beast at the end of last year, I think it probably has to be Sean Couturier. The reason I say this is because somebody has to take the draws on this man advantage, guys. It's not going to be Zegras. It's not going to be Konechny. It's not going to be Michkov. So somebody needs to take the draws. Couturier is great at draws, so they'll probably park him in front of the net. There is a distant option that maybe Tippett could go over Zegras, but I think Zegras is probably a better fit here. And also the option that I mentioned earlier, which would be a 5-forward power play. Maybe Zegras running the point, and then maybe Tippett would be on the left side. Overall, we will see what happens. I think this power play is going to get a little bit better, but it's still going to be a bottom 10, bottom 15 power play in the NHL. Next up, let's talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins, who actually had the 6th best power play in the NHL last year. This was surprising to me. I knew their power play was better than normal last year, but to see it be 6th is kind of insane. They had a 25.79% power play percentage, and yeah, I mean, this power play really worked. If we're looking at total power play points, Crosby had 27, Raquel had 19, Rust had 18, Malkin had 16, Carlson had 15, Grzelcyk had 15, Bunting had 15, Letang had 12. Even, you know, Philip Tomasino had 8, Kevin Hayes had 7. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of guys on this team that produced on the man advantage. For goals, Crosby had 12, Raquel had 9, Bunting had 9, Rust had 5, Malkin had 4, the list goes on. In terms of power play time per game, Crosby led, obviously, followed by Brian Rust, Rickard Raquel, Ville Kuvanen, who only played 8 games with the Pens, Evgeny Malkin, Erik Karlsson, and as you can see, there's a lot of other guys that got good power play time as well. Michael Bunting, Matt Grzelcyk, Chris Letang, Kevin Hayes, even Kevin Hayes got a lot of power play time. And yeah, that just goes to show that there's a lot of players, you know, getting mixed around, and also the fact that they were running 2 units for a good portion of the season. One thing that really stands out to me, though, is that near the end of last season, it was Matt Grzelcyk running the point over Chris Letang and Erik Karlsson. Grzelcyk ended up having 40 points, which is pretty insane, and he's currently an unrestricted free agent as well. So yeah, that's definitely interesting. Another thing to mention is that Ville Koivunen, a rookie for this upcoming year, he played 8 games, had 7 points in 8 games, by the way, 3 of them being on the man advantage. He was put on power play 1 at the end, and he played pretty well. With that being said, though, we do have Mike Sullivan out and Dan Muse in. So we have a completely new head coach who might have a completely new idea of what this power play should look like. Ultimately, this is a really hard power play to project just because of those facts, but I would imagine we're going to see Brian Rust, Rickard Raquel, and Sidney Crosby as the staples. And in terms of the defensemen, I'd imagine we'd see Erik Karlsson. That makes the most obvious sense to me. Like, Karlsson is still a beast offensively. It is weird, though, because in the 2 seasons on the Penguins, he has not held on to power play 1. I find that very strange. The season prior, Letang was sort of taking him off power play 1 here and there, and then last season it was Grzelcyk. Nonetheless, if Erik Karlsson is still with the team, because yes, he's in trade rumors, I expect him to be running the point here, because Matt Grzelcyk is still unsigned, and Chris Letang is getting older and coming off another heart surgery, I believe. So there you have 3 forwards, 1 defenseman, and then you're going to have somebody in front of the net. In terms of who this player is, I think there's just 2 options. It's either going to be Ville Koivunen or Evgeny Malkin. With Koivunen, he was power play 1 at the end of last year, so that's why I think he's a likely option. He is a rookie, though, and there's no guaranteed spot for him on the team. So yeah, I'm not 100% convinced it's going to be Koivunen, but certainly an option. And then with Malkin, I mean, he has been a consistent guy in this power play for so long, but in the last 2 years, he just hasn't really held on to it. So it's hard to say. I mean, we have a new head coach, but I would imagine those 2 would be the options. To sum everything up, this is what I expect it to look like, something like this. I don't expect the Penguins to have the 6th best power play in the NHL again. I think that's unrealistic. I think they just got lucky last year. And there's also a chance that a lot of these guys could get traded. Brian Rust, Rickard Raquel, Erik Karlsson, and maybe even Sidney Crosby. Maybe. Probably not, but but we'll see. Next up, we have the San Jose Sharks, who had the 7th worst power play in the NHL last year with an 18.58% power play percentage. In terms of power play points, Macklin Celebrini led with 22 in 70 games. Then you had Willie Macklin with 16, Toffoli with 15, Granlund with 15, Will Smith with 12, Wenberg with 10, Wallman with 7, the list goes on. In terms of goals, Celebrini had 8, Toffoli had 6, Eklund had 6, Granlund had 5, Will Smith had 5, Zetterlund had 4, Wenberg had 3, the rest as it shows. Now, in terms of what this power play looked like, it definitely went through some changes throughout the season. Celebrini was injured at the start of the year, so the power play was Granlund, Toffoli, Eklund, and Wenberg. And then they sort of went through a cycle of sometimes giving Jack Thompson power play 1 duties and also Jake Wallman. Then when Celebrini came back, the power play was Celebrini, Granlund, Toffoli, Wallman, and then Wenberg. I don't really know why Wenberg was on power play 1 over Eklund, but if you're looking at faceoffs, Wenberg was taking pretty much all the power play faceoffs, so I'm assuming they had him on there to take the draws. After a little while, we started to see Celebrini take more faceoffs on the power play because he was performing just as good as Wenberg, and we started to see Eklund get more power play 1 time ahead of Wenberg. So eventually the trade deadline came, Granlund was moved, Wallman was moved, and in terms of what the power play was for the last month and a half, Celebrini, Eklund, and Toffoli were the staples, and then they had a mix of things. There were some games where Luca Cagnoni, a young defenseman, was on power play 1. He was running the point, but that was only like 5 or 6 games. And then the other times they were running a 5-forward power play with Will Smith. So they had Celebrini, Eklund, Toffoli, Wenberg, and Will Smith. At this point, Celebrini was the guy taking the most faceoffs on the power play, so I'm really not sure why Wenberg was being put on that unit still, but the good news is that Will Smith was finally put on there. And in terms of what next year's power play is going to look like, let's talk about it. In my opinion, we're not going to see Wenberg on this power play 1 again. He's not needed there. We're going to see Toffoli net front. We're going to see Celebrini right circle. We're going to see Will Smith left circle, and I think we're going to see Willie Macklin in the bumper. I'm not going to completely rule out Wenberg, but I just think it's unlikely. With that being said, the Sharks also went out and got John Klingberg. Now, Klingberg, he's been up and down over the last couple of years, but he still is a very talented offensive defenseman, and unless they go with a 5-forward group, he seems like the #1 candidate to be running the point. You do have some other guys. I mean, you have Orlov, you have Jack Thompson, you have Timothy Liljegren, but Klingberg is the standout there. And I guess one other guy is maybe Luca Cagnoni if he makes the team, but I don't know if he's going to make the team. Overall, this is what I expect the power play to look like. I think it's going to improve. I'm excited to see Will Smith on this power play full time because he didn't get the most power play time last year. And yeah, I think this power play has a chance to not be a bottom 10 power play in the NHL. I think it could be like a top 20 power play. That pretty much sums up all my thoughts about this power play, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of these young guys progress. Let's talk about everyone's favorite power play for fantasy, the Seattle Kraken. The Kraken run a true nightmare scenario for fantasy hockey, a true 1A and 1B power play unit. You guys can see with power play time per game and the power play time on ice percentage distribution that they clearly distribute the power play units, and they give it a lot of ice time to different players. In terms of the success of this power play, it was 10th worst in the NHL last year with an 18.94% power play percentage. Just looking at power play points, Chandler Stevenson led in power play points with 18. Only 1 goal though, but yeah, that's pretty funny. Jared McCann with 16, Shane Wright with 13, Vince Dunn with 12, Montour with 11, Jaden Schwartz with 10, Matty Beniers with 9, Bjorkstrand with 8, Burakovsky with 8, Capo Caco with 6, Eberle with 5, Tolvanen with 5, the list goes on. In terms of goals, Shane Wright led with 7, Jaden Schwartz had 6, Montour had 5, Beniers had 4, Bjorkstrand had 4, McCann had 4, Capo Caco had 3, the list goes on, guys. A lot of these guys were scoring very similar amounts of goals. They obviously traded for Capo Caco last year, they traded away Oliver Bjorkstrand, and in terms of the offseason this year, they got rid of Burakovsky, and they added Mason Marchment. They also traded away Yanni Gourde last season as well to Tampa, but in general, I mean, just look at this team. It's sort of the same where you have a bunch of guys in the top 9 that are getting similar ice time. With that being said, even though we do have a new head coach in Lane Lambert, I would expect them to run distributed power play units once again. The only way this wouldn't happen is if some of these guys broke out completely. Guys like McCann or Beniers or Shane Wright. If they really stood out, then they would be forced to run a dedicated first unit. But at this stage, I think they're going to do a 1A, 1B thing once again. Overall, there's nothing really else to be said here. It's not not good for fantasy hockey. I don't expect this power play to improve substantially. And yeah, we'll just have to see what happens this season. Next up, we have the St. Louis Blues, who had the 16th best power play in the NHL last year with a 22.05 power play percentage. In terms of power play points, Robert Thomas led with 19 in 70 games. Jordan Kyrou had 17. Holloway had 13. Falk had 12. Buchnevich had 12. Neighbors had 12. Bolduc had 12. Fowler had 8. Braden Shen had 7. Sundqvist had 7. The list goes on. In terms of goals, not a lot of leaders here. I mean, Kyrou had 7. Bolduc had 7. Holloway had 6. Neighbors had 6. Sundqvist had 4. Thomas had 4. Shen, Fowler, and Buchnevich only had 2. Now, this power play went through a lot of changes last year, so let's start from the beginning. Drew Bannister was the head coach for the first 2 months or so, and in terms of what the power play was, it was a pretty consistent Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou, Justin Falk, Pavel Buchnevich, and Jake Neighbors power play one. I think Robert Thomas missed some time early on, so Braden Shen was put on the top unit, but yeah, in general, this power play was absolutely terrible to start the season. Drew Bannister got fired in November, Jim Montgomery came in, it was late November, and for a little bit, the power play one was Thomas, Buchnevich, Kyrou, Jake Neighbors, and also the newly acquired Cam Fowler. I also think Broberg got some looks on power play one as well, but he didn't sustain it. Now, about a month later, though, they decided to go with a 1A, 1B situation, which we all know is not the greatest for fantasy. As you guys can see here, from the month of January to February, pretty equal power play time distribution. I get why Montgomery did this. The power play wasn't very good, and as you guys can see, the power play 2 with Dylan Holloway on it was doing much better. This was also the time where Holloway started to break out, so he started to get more power play time, and in general, for the rest of the season, they were doing this 1A, 1B situation. Later on in the year, Holloway got injured, and then Jimmy Snuggerud came into the fold. Pretty immediately, Snuggerud got on power play 1 and line 1, and he got a lot of power play time. So that's what happened for the last couple of weeks of the season, and then we head into the playoffs. One thing I wanted to mention here is that Jordan Kyrou started getting less ice time as the season went on under Jim Montgomery, so don't know how big a fan Montgomery is of Kyrou, and then he was also in trade rumors the entire summer too, so something's going on there. But what we saw in the playoffs is Kyrou didn't get a lot of ice time, and not on the power play either. I mean, if you're looking at power play time on ice percentage in the playoffs, Kyrou got 36.5%, and Jimmy Snuggerud got 53.6%. We also saw Bolduc and Neighbors get more time in the power play as well. So yeah, a little bit concerning for Jordan Kyrou heading into the season. But in terms of what the power play one looked like in the playoffs, it was still sort of a 1A, 1B situation, but more so, more ice time for the first unit. They had Fowler getting the most, Snuggerud with second, Thomas with the third most, Buchnevich with the fourth most, and then they had Bolduc getting a good amount of power play time as well. With that being said, it's sort of hard to predict what this power play is going to look like. We didn't get to see Holloway play in the playoffs, so we don't really know what they would have done there. We saw Kyrou lose a lot of power play time to a guy like Jimmy Snuggerud, and yeah, we don't really know what's going to happen. In my opinion, you have enough talent to run a dedicated first unit. Robert Thomas is a star. Buchnevich, even though he had a down year last year and wasn't good in the power play, he has the ability to really turn it on. Jordan Kyrou's a sniper. Holloway broke out last year and looked incredible, especially on the power play as well. He was great ripping one-timers there. If they decided to run a dedicated first unit, I think Fowler would be a lock on there. He was incredible on the Blues last season. There is regression to be expected, but I mean, he had 5 power play points in 7 games in the playoffs. This is a unit that I would absolutely love to see, but like I said earlier, I don't know what's going to happen because Montgomery did the 1A, 1B split for pretty much the entire season. With that being said, I would probably lean towards them running 1A, 1B units. I don't love it, but I think they might do it, especially because Jimmy Snuggerud came in and got a lot of power play time. He's line 1 with Buchnevich and Thomas even strength, so I think they might put those 3 guys on the top unit. And I also worry they might put Holloway on the second unit with Kyrou because Kyrou and Holloway have a lot of chemistry and they play on the same line, even strength as well. To sum everything up, this would be my ideal power play one, but what I actually expect is probably something like this. Ultimately, I would project those units to start the season, but I really hope they run a dedicated first unit because I think it's pretty stupid to leave 30 goal scorers in Kyrou and Holloway on your second unit, but Montgomery seems to not like Kyrou, so we'll see what happens. Next up, we have the Tampa Bay Lightning power play, who had the 5th best power play in the NHL last year with a 25.86 power play percentage. Another successful year for the Tampa power play. Kucherov leading with 46 points, Point with 31, Gensel with 28, Hedman with 26, and then a big drop off with Hagel only putting up 11. In terms of goals, Gensel had 17, Braden Point had 16, Kucherov had 8, Hedman had 4, Chaffee had 4, and if you guys actually scroll all the way down here, or if I scroll all the way down here, you could see that Brandon Hagel had 0. Hagel had an insane season last year, 35 goals, 90 points in 82 games, 0 goals coming from the man advantage, and only 11 power play points. So yeah, I'm definitely expecting some regression, to be honest, and I'm probably not going to draft him a lot, but certainly impressive. Now, Tampa has been long searching for their Steven Stamkos replacement, a one-timer option on the left circle, and unfortunately, Hagel isn't really that guy because he is a left-handed player. To start the year, they had Hagel on power play 1, and he was okay on it. I mean, he had 11 power play points, but 0 goals, so I really don't think they want him to be on this top unit, and I don't know if he's going to be on this top unit come this year. We saw throughout the year that they put Mitchell Chaffee on that left circle. They put Darren Radish on that left circle. So yeah, I mean, clearly Hagel wasn't the guy that they wanted on there. And what we saw them do at the trade deadline is add Oliver Bjorkstrand. If we go post trade deadline here, we'll see that in terms of power play time per game, Bjorkstrand and Hagel were close, but Bjorkstrand averaged more per game. There were some games where Hagel was power play 1, but for pretty much the rest of the regular season, it was Bjorkstrand on that left circle. Now, I will say that Bjorkstrand wasn't very good on this power play. I mean, he had 1 goal in 18 games, which isn't ideal. He had 4 points, so it's hard to say he's going to be there for this upcoming season, but I feel like I'd lean towards him versus Brandon Hagel just based on what they did throughout the year. With all that being said, this is my projected power play 1. I do expect Bjorkstrand to be on that left circle. They need a right-hand shot there, and Hagel had 0 goals on the power play last year. I just don't think it makes sense to keep Hagel on there. So yeah, I expect Bjorkstrand left circle, Kucherov right circle, point bumper, Gensel net front, and Hedman running the point. I think Hagel's going to be overvalued in drafts. I think Bjorkstrand's going to be undervalued, and I think Bjorkstrand's going to be a sleeper heading into this upcoming year. Next up, we have the Toronto Maple Leafs, who had the 9th best power play in the NHL last year, sporting a 24.77 power play percentage. If we're looking at the most power play points last year, Mitch Marner led with 33, Nylander had 30, Austin Matthews had 25 in 67 games, Tavares had 20 in 75 games, Matthew Nyes had 15, Morgan Riley had 14, the list goes on. If we're looking at goals, Tavares and Nylander led with 12, Matthews had 10, Marner had 6, Nyes had 5, McMahon had 3, you guys can see the rest here. Now, in terms of what this power play looked like last year, if we go back to the beginning of the season, they had Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Tavares, with Oliver Ekman-Larsson. Larsson was a guy running power play 1, but unfortunately, he wasn't very successful on this power play, and about a month into the season, they put Riley back in the top unit. You had Matthews get injured for a bit, so they were mixing things up, but when he returned, they decided to go with a 5-forward unit. They had Nylander, Marner, Matthews, Tavares, and now they had Matthew Nyes. This is unconventional in the NHL, but Marner is one of those guys who can hold the blue line really well, and there's a reason why they tried him at defenseman a couple of years ago. So that's what they did. Marner was running the point. They had Matthew Nyes net front, Tavares in the bumper, Matthews right circle, and then Nylander left circle. Now, obviously, we know Mitch Marner is gone. That is a huge, huge blow to the Leafs in general. It's hard to replace 102 points, guys, but they're going to have to try. With that being said, could they run a 5-forward power play? Yes. But it seems very unlikely that they would because they don't have a Marner type player to run the point. So my best guess would be they're going back to Morgan Riley. They tried OEL last year, but it didn't work. So I would say Riley's the front runner. He's been on this power play 1 for many years. He has the experience. I know he's not the same player, but he was decent on the power play this year. And in my mind, it's going to be him. We'll see what they do in camp. I'm sure they're going to give OEL a look at some point, but I would wager that it would be Nyes, Nylander, Tavares, Matthews, and Morgan Riley. Ultimately, even though losing Marner hurts, this power play should still be elite. It should still be top 10 in the NHL as long as everybody's healthy. And I think these guys are still going to rack up power play points. Next up, we have Utah, now the Utah Mammoth. And last year, they had the 10th best power play in the NHL with a 24.15 power play percentage. In terms of power play points, Keller led with 37. You had Gunther with 29, Schmaltz with 25, Sergachev with 23, Logan Cooley with 20, Barrett Hayden with 15. All these guys are really good in the power play. Dylan Gunther led with 12 goals. Keller had 10 goals. Schmaltz had 9. Hayden had 7. Cooley Cooley had 7, and Sergachev had 3. If we're looking at power play time per game, you could see Keller led, then it was Gunther, then it was Sergachev, and then it was Schmaltz. Those guys were the staples. They were always power play 1 as long as they were healthy. And then you had Logan Cooley, followed by Barrett Hayton. And as you guys can see, Cooley and Hayton had similar power play time per game last season. At the start of the year, it was Barrett Hayton, then it was Logan Cooley, then it was Barrett Hayton again, and then it was back to Logan Cooley. So it happened quite a bit where they were getting switched from power play 2 to power play 1. In terms of why Barrett Hayton got a lot of power play 1 time last year, the biggest reason was faceoffs. If we're looking at faceoffs here, Barrett Hayton took the most draws on the man advantage. He had a 64.4% power play faceoff win percentage, and Logan Cooley, second in power play faceoffs, had a 47.2% power play faceoff win percentage. We also see Schmaltz take a good amount of faceoffs on the power play as well, and he has a decent power play faceoff win percentage, but I think that was ultimately the biggest reason why Barrett Hayton stayed on power play 1 for a good stretch. And I think we also have to recognize that Hayton was pretty good on power play 1 as well in terms of production. He had 7 goals and a total of 15 points with only a minute and 59 seconds of power play time per game. So that's pretty darn solid. Now, the big question mark that everyone is wondering about is the JJ Peterka acquisition. This is something that really needs to be discussed because a lot of people just assume Peterka is going to be put on power play 1. And like I talked about in my offseason video, I have a lot of concerns. The ultimate issue for me with Peterka potentially being power play 1 is if you want to keep Logan Cooley on there and you want to take Nick Schmaltz off, then Logan Cooley is the only guy that's going to be taking draws on the man advantage. Is there a chance that Cooley works on faceoffs a lot in the summer and becomes a faceoff specialist? Sure, but he's still a really young player, and based on last season, it doesn't seem that wise to have him being the only player taking draws on the power play. That's the biggest roadblock, and also the fact that this power play was 10th in the NHL last year. Schmaltz put up 25 power play points, Logan Cooley put up 20, and why would you try to fix something that isn't broken? Now, if this power play suffers, Peterka could definitely get an opportunity. I'm not saying he's never going to get a look there. And who knows, maybe in camp, it will be Peterka on there and Cooley will be taking all the draws. Like, that's certainly a possibility. But I think ultimately this is what the power play is going to look like. I think it's going to be Gunther, left circle, Keller, right circle, Schmaltz, bumper, and Logan Cooley, net front. And then obviously the defenseman is going to be Sergachev because I don't think Sean Durzi is going to contest that. It seems like it's Sergachev's spot to lose at this point. I also want to mention that there is a possibility that Barrett Hayton could be power play 1 over Logan Cooley. I don't think it will be, but it happened a lot last year, and that's something to consider. It's not a lock that Cooley is going to be on this top unit. And maybe even Barrett Hayton could take off Nick Schmaltz, and then Cooley could be net fronter in the bumper, and Barrett Hayton could be the face-off guy. That's a possibility as well. To sum everything up, I think this power play is going to be deadly once again. Gunther on that left circle is insane. Keller is a beast on the power play. Logan Cooley's a beast if he's on there, and I expect it to be a top 15 power play, maybe even top 10 once again. Next up, we have the Vancouver Canucks, who had the 15th best power play in the NHL last season, sporting a 22.52% power play percentage. In terms of power play points, Quinn Hughes led with 29 in 68 games. Very good. Brock Besser had 20. Jake DeBrusk had 19. Garland had 16. Elias Pettersson had 16 in 64 games. JT Miller had 14 in 40 games. Hronek had 7, etc., etc. For power play goals, DeBrusk led with 14. Besser had 9. Garland had 7. Pettersson had 7. Quinn Hughes had 4. JT Miller had 2. In terms of what this power play looked like to start the season, it was a pretty consistent power play 1 of Quinn Hughes, Brock Besser, Elias Pettersson, JT Miller, and Connor Garland. As you guys know, though, JT Miller had to take a leave from the team, and that's when they decided to put Jake DeBrusk on that top unit. Eventually, JT Miller returned, which bumped DeBrusk off power play 1, but then JT Miller got traded to the Rangers. Philip Hedl was involved in this JT Miller trade, and Hedl did get some power play 1 time, but he ended up only playing like 15 games because he got a concussion and had to miss the rest of the regular season. With that being said, after the concussion, the power play 1 was a consistent Quinn Hughes, Brock Besser, Jake DeBrusk, Elias Pettersson, and Connor Garland. Now, obviously, we do have a new head coach. Rick Tocchet is gone, Adam Foote is in, but I think we can have a pretty good idea of how to project this power play, and I guess we'll start with the locks. Quinn Hughes is the obvious lock. He's going to run the point. Elias Pettersson's a lock. I'm pretty sure he's right circle. And then I think Brock Besser is a lock as well. He's going to be in the bumper. I also think Jake DeBrusk is probably a lock at this point because he did have 14 power play goals last year, and he was really good in front of the net. With that being said, we have the 4 players, and the big question mark is who is going to be the last forward. Now, to be honest, guys, I can't tell you who this person's going to be. I think there's so many options. I think Garland's an option because he got a lot lot of power play time last year, and he was pretty good on there. I think Jonathan Lekeri-Mackey's a dark horse. He's a right-hand shot. He can be on that left circle opposite of Elias Pettersson. I think even Filip Hronek is an option as well. Filip Chytil is definitely an option too. He's a really good skater, so he could also take some zone entries on the power play, but they don't really need him to do that if Elias Pettersson's skating gets better, so we'll see. And then maybe even Evander Kane, but I really don't think Evander Kane is going to be on power play 1. Overall, this power play should still be solid. I expect it to be a top 20 power play in the NHL, and hopefully we could see a bounce back from Elias Pettersson. Next up, we have the Vegas Golden Knights, who had the second best power play in the NHL last year with a 28.34% power play percentage. In terms of power play points, Jack Eichel led with 34, Mark Stone with 25 in 66 games. You had Tomas Hertl with 23, Shea Theodore with 19, Pavel Dorofeyev with 17, and Noah Hanifin with 10. We also saw Victor Olofsson with 8, William Karlsson with 6, etc., etc. If we're looking at goals, Tomas Hertl led with 14, Dorofeyev had 13, Olofsson had 6, Mark Stone had 5, Eichel had 5, Shea Theodore had 2. Going into the season, there was a big question of whether it was going to be Hanifin or Theodore on power play 1, and for some reason, I thought it was going to be Hanifin. He was power play 1 in the playoffs, he was power play 1 in camp, until the last week. They said, hey, we're putting Theodore on there. So yeah, that was just a big lesson learned on my end, especially because Theodore is a much better power play specialist than Noah Hanifin. With that being said, at the start, they had Eichel, Hertl, Theodore, and Mark Stone. And then they had Victor Olofsson on power play 1 for the first month or so. Olofsson was the guy on there, but then he got injured. So they put Pavel Dorofeyev on there. This proved to be very successful. Dorofeyev ended up scoring 35 goals, and he ended up with 13 goals on the man advantage. Now, the big question mark is now Mitch Marner's on the team, and what do you do with this power play now? Because, like I said, it was second best in the NHL, and now you have to take someone off and put Mitch Marner on. This is a complicated scenario, but I present to you 3 options. The first option that I think is most likely is this. This would be Hertl net front, Eichel left side, Mitch Marner bumper, Pavel Dorofeyev right circle, and Shea Theodore running the point. Even though Mark Stone was good in the playoffs last year, Hertl and Dorofeyev were the guys that scored the most goals, and I think if you put Marner on there and take Dorofeyev off, it just wouldn't work as well. I really do like Hertl in the bumper, but he can still get to that spot and be a threat net front, so that's why I think this works. The second option would be taking Pavel Dorofeyev off. In this scenario, Marner would be right circle, Hertl would be bumper, Eichel would be left circle, Stone would be net front, and Shea Theodore would be running the point. The only problem with this is that Eichel and Marner are both playmakers, and they're opposite of each other. I guess Eichel can be a shooter, though, because 2 seasons ago, he had like 400 shots or something, so maybe that could just be how it works in the power play, with Eichel and Hertl being the main shooters, but I still think Dorofeyev would be a better option on this top unit. The third and final option that not many people are considering is a 5-forward power play. Now, I think Shea Theodore is great. He was good in the power play last year, but we do have to recognize that Marner last season on the Leafs was running the point, and the Leafs power play was great. So there's a chance that they take Shea Theodore off, have Marner run the point, and then have it be Eichel, Hertl, Dorofeyev, and Mark Stone. I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't tell you what they're going to do, but those are the 3 options that I think are possible, and I rank them by the likelihood of them happening. Regardless of which power play they end up going with, this power play is still going to be amazing, and I expect it to be a top 5 power play once again. Next up, we have the Washington Capitals, who had the 13th best power play in the NHL last year with a 23.53% power play percentage. If we're looking at power play points, Dylan Strome led with 34, Ovechkin had 22 in 65 games, Wilson had 17, Chychrun had 15, Karlsson had 14, Pierre-Luc Dubois had 14, and Connor McMichael had 10. In terms of power play goals, Ovechkin had 14 in 65 games, Wilson had 11, Strome had 9, Chychrun had 5, Dubois had 4, McMichael had 4, Karlsson had 1, etc. Now, in terms of what this power play looked like, it did change throughout the year and in the playoffs as well, but looking at the start here, it was pretty consistent of Ovechkin, Strome, Karlsson, Tom Wilson, and Pierre-Luc Dubois. Then eventually Dubois got taken off, and they ran a power play with 2 defensemen. So they had Chychrun in one of the circles, on the right circle. They had Karlsson running the point, Ovechkin left side, Dylan Strome bumper, and then Tom Wilson net front. Then you actually saw in the last 2 months or so, they took Chychrun off power play 1, and they put Pierre-Luc Dubois back on it. Fast forward to the playoffs, in terms of what the power play was there, they went back to the 2 defensemen on it. So it was Ovechkin, Strome, Chychrun, Karlsson, and Tom Wilson. So yeah, it's hard to say what they're going to do do for this upcoming year, but we have a pretty good idea of what they like. Based on last season, we have 2 front runners for the power play 1. I think the number 1 option would be the 2 defenseman power play, just because they ran that in the playoffs when it mattered the most. And that would be Tom Wilson net front, Ovechkin left circle, Dylan Strome bumper, Jacob Chychrun right circle, and John Carlson running the point. I think the second option, which is very likely as well, is a 1 defenseman power play. And in that situation, you'd probably have Wilson net front, Ovi left circle, Dylan Strome right circle, and then either Carlson or Chychrun running the point. Now, in terms of who would be in the bumper, you have a couple of options. Dubois seemed like the guy last year when they were running 1 defenseman on the power play, but I could also see a player like Connor McMichael getting a shot as well, or Alexi Protas. I think Dubois would be the front runner just looking at power play time per game, but McMichael was right behind him. He only had 20 less seconds of power play time per game last year. So yeah, I think it's going to be 1 Dubois, 2 McMichael, 3 Protas. Overall, this power play is pretty hard to project. John Carlson is getting older. Chychrun, he has a blistering shot, so I think there's a good chance they want him on there. And maybe if they run 1 defenseman on the power play, it would be Chychrun over Carlson. Last but certainly not least is the Winnipeg Jets, who had the best power play percentage in the NHL last year with a 28.9% power play percentage. In terms of power play points, Kyle Connor had 28, Mark Scheifele had 25, Velarde had 25, Morrissey had 22, Ehlers had 22, Perfetti had 15, Pionk had 12, Niederreiter had 11, Nemestikov had 11, and Iafallo had 10. I think what's really interesting about this power play is that even though they ran a dedicated first unit, the second unit was extremely productive, and I don't think that's sustainable. I really think this Jets power play is going to come back to reality this season. I don't think it's going to be top 5, and it might not even be top 10. In terms of goals, Velarde led with 12, Scheifele had 11, Connor had 9, Ehlers had 6, Iafallo had 6, Perfetti had 5, Niederreiter had 4. The list goes on. Now, in terms of what this power play 1 was, it was very, very consistent. It was Velarde net front, Scheifele left circle, Nikolai Ehlers bumper, Kyle Connor right circle, and Josh Morrissey running the point. Ehlers worked really hard in the summer to play in the bumper on the power play, to play in the slot, because they were really trying to find a bumper player, and they finally put him on power play 1. It was great to see, guys, because we've been clamoring for this for many years. This was pretty much the power play the entire season, but we did have some injuries. Ehlers missed 13 games, Velarde missed 11 games, and when those guys were gone, it was a mix of Cole Perfetti and Alex Iafallo. With all that being said, Ehlers is gone. He's on the Canes now, and they have a big spot to fill on this power play. They need somebody playing the bumper, and there's a couple of options. In my opinion, the first option, the option that I'm going to project, is Cole Perfetti. Perfetti's been good on the power play. I can see him playing in that bumper role. I don't think Perfetti's going to be a superstar, guys. I don't think he is going to have this insane offensive ceiling, but he makes the most sense. I also think there's some other options as well, though. Iafallo got power play 1 time last year with injuries, and I think there was times where he was power play 1 over Perfetti when players were injured. So that is something to consider. And then you also have 2 other guys. Jonathan Taves, he obviously is a big question mark. If he's fully healthy, then, you know, there's a shot he can be on power play 1. There's no doubt in my mind that he can be power play 1, but we just don't know what's going to happen if he plays a full year. In terms of the last options here, you have Nyquist, Nemestikov, and Niederreiter. I think it's unlikely, but I'm not ruling it out because the opportunity is there. Overall, like I said, this power play, it's going to be good, but it's not going to be best in the NHL again. I just don't see it happening, and we'll have to see how Ehlers' absence affects his top unit. All right, guys, that is the end of the video. This was a lot of work, so hit that like button, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I hope this helps you for your upcoming drafts.